What's going on, guys? Just gonna wait a couple minutes here. Hopefully some more people trickle in. Change the title of this live stream since I'm the worst. Hey, let me know in the chat if you guys can hear me. You guys hear me all right? Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. Gonna let a few more people trickle in here and then we'll get started. How's everyone's building going so far this morning? Yeah, Jessica, totally agree. Kind of spent a decent amount of my morning trying to figure out if a Gurley, Brown, and Connor lineup would work. It's a lot easier to do on FanDuel, but on DraftKings in particular, it's extremely tough, especially if you're not in love with some of the cheaper options at wide receiver. So give it a couple more minutes here. Maybe we'll start to kind of go game by game. As you guys can see, do have the Fantasy Labs Twitter account on the left side here. If you guys aren't following that for news, I would definitely recommend that. Have a couple guys full time just doing news, so it's one of the best things. I'm always following along on Sunday mornings, have it push right to my phone, so you're going to get everything quick. So we see Will Fuller is active, so that's huge for Deshaun Watson in general. DeAndre Hopkins, really liked DeAndre Hopkins as the week goes on as kind of a pivot in tournaments off of Antonio Brown, so definitely think that he's in play for tournaments. Definitely doing everything I can do to get AB in cash. I think a lot of people have talked about it, but just starting your lineups with AB and Connor does seem like a really solid strategy, especially in cash games this week. It's been talked about quite a bit, but AB just destroys man coverage, and that is pretty much what KC does the most of us in the entire league. So the matchup sets up perfectly for those guys just to go nuts. Just to update the implied totals here, they do have the third highest implied total on the slate at home. Just a smash spot. The pace should be really decent in this game as well. I think Mahomes is a really solid option for cash games as well. I think for me at quarterback, it's between Mahomes and Jimmy Garoppolo. Really like both of those guys. At the cheaper end, would love to get up to Ben at 6,900. Again, it's much easier to do on FanDuel than on DraftKings. But as of right now, I don't think I'm going to make it there on my main team with Roethlisberger unless I decide to pay down somewhere else. So the Steelers game, obviously, it's going to be probably the most popular game on the slate, but I don't think you can really fade Connor at the price that he's at. He's got an 8K roll. DraftKings basically dropped the ball on this one. So he's the first guy into all my lineups. I just don't. I'd rather be overweight on a guy that's 6,700 with that roll, and if that beats me, totally fine with that. Definitely trying to decide between Tevin Coleman and then if we get some news on TJ Yeldon. I think that's going to be an interesting decision that people are going to make. Obviously, you can still play both of them, but if you're trying to get one of the expensive guys like Gordon or Gurley in after Connor, you're going to have to make a decision between Tevin Coleman and TJ Yeldon. So definitely something that I'm considering as the day goes on here. But I do really like the idea of going after Yeldon. I think that the pace is going to be decent in this game. It's something that I look at quite a bit. So Bortles hopefully going to be in decent game script, but with Fournette out, they're obviously going to be a little bit more pass heavy than they used to be. And Yeldon in general just sets up so well for DraftKings. His price is quite a bit higher than a guy like James White. So if you really needed salary, I think James White is fine at 4,500. Keep an eye on news. It's going to be a huge day for news, honestly, when we're trying to figure out where these pivots are going to come from. But one thing that I do try and tell people is try and give yourself some flexibility in the afternoon games. We have some really nice games to attack in the afternoon, specifically the Detroit and San Francisco game. That's a game I'm going to be targeting heavily. I mentioned that I like Jimmy G. I would assume most people by this time of the week realize how good of a play that Kittle is and that Doyle is, but just getting that correlation with Garoppolo and Kittle is something I'm definitely looking to do. And then going after this game just makes a lot of sense because of the defenses and the pace in general. So I really like the idea of going with Kittle and bringing it back with someone like Kenny Golladay for Detroit at 4,800. He's a really strong value. I really like Golladay kind of in that price range at wide receiver. I also think that Cobb is a really solid play that a lot of people haven't been talking about. If Rhodes ends up on some of the perimeter wide receivers for Green Bay, I just think that Cobb is in a really strong spot for his price. So he's actually, I wanted to see his price on FanDuel actually, because on DraftKings I think he's in a really decent spot. He's 4,600 on DraftKings, and then on FanDuel he's 6,200. So yeah, he's someone that I'm considering kind of in that mid-range. I think I do prefer Cobb at this point over Funchess, and that might not be a really popular take. A lot of people really like Funchess just because of the increased role without Greg Olsen, but I'm a little bit worried about pace in this game, and I said from the beginning of the week that I think the biggest beneficiary of those targets is going to be Christian McCaffrey, but with all the value that we have at running back and trying to get up to a guy like Gurley, trying to put Connor into these teams, McCaffrey is probably going to be the guy I have the least exposure to in that tier. I think I prefer Melvin Gordon just because of the touchdown equity. I'm a little bit worried about McCaffrey as far as scoring touchdowns. So definitely keeping an eye on that. Thanks for the questions, guys. I'm going to try and kind of rip through the slate here, and then I'll go through the chat as well. But yeah, keep the questions coming. I'll be sure and touch on that as we go here. So yeah, if we want to just kind of quickly go game by game now, since we touched on most of the positions. So just in general, the game that's the highest point total of the week, we talked a decent amount about Pittsburgh and Kansas City. Obviously like the spot for Pittsburgh, but in tournaments, I think KC makes a ton of sense. Really like Mahomes. He's just shown a ton of upside. And then in this game, I think that there's a chance that Mahomes ends up being one of the top value plays, even at 6,100. He's a guy that I'm strongly considering in that range. Just this game in general, trying to get as much kind of access to this as you can, I think is something that you're going to want to do in tournaments, but you want to really try and build your lineups in a way that is somewhat more unique. So if everyone's going to be on the Pittsburgh side of this game, I don't mind attacking a game stack with Kansas City. Maybe you bring it back with Connor and AB as well, but just the savings you get on Mahomes versus a guy like Ben on DraftKings, that extra salary is super helpful. So like I said, I really like Ben on FanDuel in particular, just because he's almost the same price, I believe, as Mahomes, and I do think he's a better raw points play in general. But yeah, this game is one of the ones that you kind of need to get right this week. So yeah, moving to the Saints game, I think the Saints are kind of in somewhat of a sneaky spot, honestly, because I think there's some people that are going to go right back to that Breeze, Kamara, Michael Thomas stack, but at the same time, a lot of the people are going to go straight to this Pittsburgh game. So in general, really good spot. Saw someone mention in the chat Jarvis Landry. Yeah, I think he's a fantastic play, especially on DraftKings. He sets up so well. One of those guys that we were taking a look at his air yards last week, and that's a really impressive thing to me to see his usage downfield and compared to what we've seen in the past. I just think he's a lot better player, actually, than I think most people do. So definitely on Landry, on DraftKings in particular. I think he's probably my favorite play in this game just because I'm not going to make it to Michael Thomas on my main teams as of right now. But I mean, Michael Thomas, he's a guy they're constantly scheming to get the ball. So, I mean, I think he's a fantastic GPP play, really good play in general, just probably not one I'm going to make it to since I'm going to try and get as much AB exposure as I can. Obviously, love Todd Gurley. So those are my two top guys to pay up for, obviously. So if you guys don't know, I don't play a ton of lineups. I do mostly some of the single entry and 3 max GPPs, but I go up in stakes a little bit. So my main team will be in the 1K on DraftKings, and then I'll have 2 teams at the 500 level on FanDuel. So I don't think I'll make it to Michael Thomas on one of those teams as of now, but I do think that they're in a really strong spot against Cleveland. Cleveland side of the ball, I think it's Landry, and I don't think it's especially close. So we talked a little bit about this game in San Francisco versus Detroit. Probably my favorite game on the slate. So I'm going to try and get as many game stacks as I can. They're probably going to be one of my main teams that I build around in 3 max. Really like Jimmy Garoppolo, like I said, with Kittle, and then some of these cheaper options as well, like Pettis. I think this game gives you a lot of flexibility too, because you can, if you're behind later, you can always pivot to some of the guys in this game that might be a little bit lower on, someone like Marvin Jones. You can fully stack this game. I think that the pace is going to be a lot of points. And to start the week, I thought this was a little bit low for Detroit, and the line really hasn't moved a ton in favor of them. So I think kind of a contrarian way to stack this game would be with Stafford and his outside weapons. We know that San Francisco is pretty decent at taking away the middle of the field, but I think that there's a chance that Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay have really solid games. So definitely a game that I'm going to try and build around in tournaments. I definitely am considering a lot of these guys in cash as well. And then for my main GPP team. So the next game, the Colts versus the Redskins. Yeah, Jack Doyle. I think that some people kind of considered him somewhat of a bust last week. I really didn't. He basically got there. He's still getting the usage that we thought he would. Yeah, he didn't catch the touchdown. Ebron caught the touchdown, but I easily think he could go the other way. If Luck looked actually pretty decent. He hasn't been pushing the ball as far downfield. That could change kind of as he gets a little bit more confidence in his arm, but I still think that Doyle has such a locked-in role, and his price is just egregious. I don't think we're going to see him around this range for much longer on DraftKings. So it's pretty much Doyle and Kittle for me. Not a lot of hot takes, I guess, at tight end. I don't think you really need to get too crazy. The other guys that I'm considering, Jared Cook, just if I need the savings. He does open up quite a bit, and Jonnu as well, but I'm a little bit more worried about the Tennessee offense now that Gabbard's starting. Definitely on the Houston defense, if I haven't mentioned that yet. I think they're one of the top defense options on the slate. I think on DraftKings specifically, they're significantly cheaper, so $2,600 on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, I do really like the Washington defense from this game, so that's why I wanted to touch on that quick. They're a team that pressures extremely well, and Luck will take sacks. That's what you guys need to realize, is that it doesn't really matter as far as points scored. I just want turnovers, I want pass attempts, and I want a guy that's going to take sacks. So this is a pretty good spot for the Washington defense. Definitely on them for sure. FanDuel, they're still a pretty strong value at 3,700. I think they're a really strong play for cash games in comparison to Houston, who's all the way at 4,500 on FanDuel. So just trying to take advantage of some of those price discrepancies. One way you can do that, at Labs, we have a metric called bargain rating. So it just kind of gives you an idea of which guys are underpriced on which sites. So definitely check that out. Yeah, just a reminder in general, now that we got a few more people watching, check out Fantasy Labs. Like, no affiliate links, anything like that. Just truly think that we have the best tools out there for people that want to really get get serious about DFS. In general, I guess think that you can take your game to the next level in that way. So that's how everything I use for my research is 99% at labs. So definitely check it out. And as well, like delete everything off your phone that you're using to check games. Like I downloaded the Action Network app. It's something that we've put a lot of resources into, and it's great for following games. So definitely download the app at Action Network for sure. So yeah, let's touch a little bit more on some of these other games. What stands out to me as a game that could be super under-owned is the Philly side of this Tampa Bay game. They could easily be a situation where Nick Foles it ends up with a couple of touchdowns at halftime, and it just wasn't something that we were considering enough. In general, really like their team total, and really think that they're kind of underrated on this slate. Anytime they're kind of you have a team that's outside like this top tier, like everyone's going to be on the Saints game, everyone's going to be on the Steelers game. If you go down a little bit, you can catch a lot of value as far as ownership is concerned on those guys. So I think Nelson Aguilar is in play. If you really want to get contrarian at tight ends, Zach Ertz is one of the top guys as far as leverage that we have in our models. So definitely think that he's in play. At 6,500, it's tough to get in some of these other plays that we really like, but I think that this game is probably going to be one that we look back on and think we should have had a little bit more exposure to. Yeah, so the Raiders game, I actually think there's some decent pieces in this game. Was considering Keenum for a while just because he's so cheap. Kind of moved to some of these other options, but I still really like his weapons. I think that Emmanuel Sanders is just going to continue to have that role in the slot where Keenum just peppers him with targets. Sutton at 3,500, he's a really talented player. If you're really getting a bind and need salary, I think you can do worse in GPPs than Sutton. Really talented guy, like I said, and sets up well. He had almost as many targets, I believe, as Demaryius Thomas last week. So he's another guy that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. The Raiders side of the ball, really only interested in Jared Cook. I'm not even like a big like Jared Cook truther, but he sets up really well in this matchup. Historically, over the last couple of years, Denver's really struggled to defend tight ends. So he's a guy that's going to be involved in the offense. He's still super cheap in general on both sites. So Jared Cook, outside of the Kittle and Doyle range, I think he's right there. Outside of that, the Rams game, Todd Gurley is the guy that's looking like he could break the slate for all these Antonio Brown people. It's really hard to get both of them in. Very easy to do on FanDuel. DraftKings, it's a little bit harder to do. In general, like this Cardinals team just doesn't look very good. So game script should be right there for Gurley. He could easily score 2 or 3 touchdowns in this game, and I don't think that's outside of his range of outcomes. You don't need me to tell you that he's probably the top running back option on the slate. Probably Connor right behind him. So the Patriots game, this one is going to be one that you probably do need to get right as well. With some of the injuries that we have for New England, keep an eye on news. As we can see on the Fantasy Labs dashboard here, Rex Burkhead is expected to play, barring any setbacks. So that's an interesting kind of data point away from James White. James White at 4,500 on DraftKings is still going to have kind of the same role, but maybe his touchdown upside is a little bit lower now that Burkhead's playing. Burkhead's still going to have that role at the goal line, you would think. So interesting. The Patriots are a really tough team to kind of go after week to week just because they are so spread out and they game plan, obviously, for the right reasons. They kind of go with an efficiency approach. And against Jacksonville, it's a pretty tough sell. I actually do like some pieces on the Jacksonville side of this game. I think Blake Bortles on FanDuel specifically is in play for tournaments just because he opens up your entire lineup. You can pretty much do whatever you want on FanDuel. If you're willing to go down to Bortles, maybe you pair him with Yeldon. I think that Yeldon is going to have a significant role, obviously. Sets up better for DraftKings scoring, but I think that he's going to get all the running work as well. I'm not really too worried about Grant is on that side of the ball. So I think that Yeldon versus Tevin Coleman is going to be my biggest decision when I start finishing up my lineups. So this Falcons game against the Panthers, talked about McCaffrey. Definitely think that he's going to catch a lot of balls. Obviously, the Falcons don't defend running backs out of the backfield very well. Was kind of on the Falcons side of the ball a lot more earlier in the week. Probably not going to have Matt Ryan, even though I think his price is decent. I think the best way to get access to the Falcons side of the ball is just to roster Julio in tournaments. if Matt Ryan has an extremely good game, it's going to be because of Julio. So I don't think that the upside's really there just to play Ryan and some of these other guys. Like I think Sanu's fine. I think all those guys are fine. I'm probably just going to have Coleman from this game on my main teams, but kind of a decent spot in general if you really want to try and leverage the field. I have concerns with pace in general. I'm a little bit concerned with Coleman's usage in the passing game when I'm making my decisions on DraftKings. It's probably not going to matter because of his role and the price, but I am a little bit concerned because he wasn't used when Devonta Freeman was out in the past. He just wasn't used that much in the passing game in his place. So that's a little bit concerning, but something that I'm going to kind of monitor as the morning goes on. So Blaine Gabbert looking like he's going to start for Tennessee. So that puts Houston as one of the top defensive plays on both sites. So they're a lot cheaper on DraftKings, but you'll probably get lower ownership on them on FanDuel. This Chargers game is one I've gone back and forth with a lot of sharp action coming out on Buffalo throughout the week. So it's not that I think Buffalo's a great team or anything like that. I try and think about the Chargers, that they had to travel across the country from LA to Buffalo and against a team that just got absolutely smoked. Obviously, I like Melvin Gordon. I love the usage. I was really high on Melvin Gordon earlier in the week. I still think he'll find his way onto some of my teams, just might not make it to my main high dollar teams. But this game in general just looks kind of gross. But I do think that the usage is going to be there for Gordon. So he's probably my top play in this game. Keenan Allen, I just think there's guys in that range I like a little bit more. I mentioned DeAndre Hopkins. He's kind of my top leverage play as far as wide receivers at the top end. I think that Michael Thomas and Julio are quite a bit better than Keenan in this matchup as well. So we've touched on pretty much all the games now. I'm going to go look at the chat, see if we have any questions here. Tough jamming in Brown, Gurley, and Connor. Mentioned that a couple times, but thanks for the question, Jessica. Cash lineup with Matt Ryan. I think it's fine to go with them, but I would do everything you can kind of to get to that Jimmy G and Mahomes kind of range in cash at least. I guess like their range of outcomes a little bit better. Obviously, you get the rushing upside with Mahomes in one of the games that we're really trying to target. So on kind of the subject of that, Deshaun Watson, he was actually in my main team last week. Really like him in general, especially because Fuller's in this game. So I'm considering going to Watson on a tournament team for sure, just because I think he has a lot of rushing upside, and I think it's a good bounce back spot for Hopkins. So kind of in that range, he's like right there with Ben. So it's kind of tougher. FanDuel makes a little bit more sense just because the pricing's a little bit softer. But yeah, considering that, so Landry 20 targets. I don't think it's outside the range of outcomes for him for sure. I think he's one of the top plays on DraftKings just on volume alone. So definitely on Landry. Let's see here. Thanks for all the questions, guys. Really appreciate it. Happy you're all here. Any thoughts on Corey Davis, Jonnu, with Gabbert starting? Yeah, Corey Davis, another guy that was up there. One of the stats that I use quite a bit at wide receiver is called Whopper. It kind of measures air yards and target share. It's one of Josh Hermsmeyer's stats from airyards.com. Check that out. But yeah, he was one of the top guys for Whopper last week. A ton of targets. But I don't know if I can really trust him with Gabbert. Same thing with Jonnu. I think a couple people have mentioned this, but Jonnu would have been an awesome tight end play if we didn't have Doyle and Kittle to go to. So definitely think that I'm going to be kind of off the Tennessee offense, going to be going more towards the Houston defense. Another question from Jessica. Quincy, Enunwa. I just mentioned the Whopper stat. Quincy Enunwa was one of the top guys in that. The only guys that had a higher Whopper in week 1 were Julio Jones and Odell Beckham. So really like Quincy Enunwa. Actually wrote him up for one of the props for the Action Network. Think he's a really solid play today, and his prop is really solid. So check that out. We also do have a props dashboard at Fantasy Labs. Basically allows you to tack where the weakest lines are attached to our projections. Obviously, Sean Corner is doing our projections this year, the number 1 ranker over the last 3 years, each of the last 3 years, actually. So extremely impressive. Our projections, get so pumped for that in general this year. Quincy Enunwa, really solid prop on him. Mike Williams, Tyrell, and play with Travis out. Yeah, I think that that does kind of limit the target share there a little bit. I mentioned that I don't love this game. I just don't think Buffalo is going to score enough points to really give you a ceiling for some of these Chargers guys. I'm more on the Melvin Gordon side of that game, and it has a little bit more to do with game script. Any love for Alex Smith? Yeah, I think Alex Smith's in play. I do like some of these other guys that I've mentioned in his price range, but for GPPs, I think you can get Alex Smith to Jordan Reed pretty low owned in a game that should be decent. Another thing with that game script in general, is it going to play towards the passing game for Washington? Probably not. But if they do get ahead, I would imagine he's going to be a decent part of it. Landry over Sanders in tiers. Yeah, I actually really like the tiers system in general. I think they're pretty soft games. I think I do like Landry over Sanders, but I mean, Sanders has got a locked-in role. I think that you can kind of split shares of those guys if you're playing tournaments in tiers. I think that I haven't looked at them, but I would assume that those are the two top guys kind of in that range. I have two tight ends in my main lineup. Gurley, AB, Connor, Landry cost a lot. Kittle and Pettis. If you want to try and get Gurley, AB, and Connor into a main DraftKings lineup, you might have to go with two tight ends. I think that that's a decent roster construction in tournaments. It'll give you a little bit more differentiation. In cash, it's not something I normally do just because those slots are so valuable, and I do really try and play three running backs in cash games, in tournaments as well, just because it's the spot where we can project volume the best. So I typically don't do two tight end for that reason, but I think it's reasonable. Njoku, yeah, he had a bunch of targets in the last game. Without Gordon, that should stay the same. Didn't do a lot with them. I think if you really want to pay down at tight end, it's probably Jared Cook. But I think Njoku in tournaments, especially on if you're kind of game stacking the Saints Superdome game, Njoku and Landry are the guys that you probably want to bring it back with. Thoughts on Washington versus Indy game? Yeah, we talked about decently high point total. It's definitely a game that could be going a little bit overlooked. Talked about Philly in kind of that way too. So if you really wanted to stack this game up, you could. Chris Thompson, I do prefer him to Adrian Peterson. Probably a bias of mine. I was trying to talk myself into this morning. So if Adrian Peterson with this role in a game where we think that they're going to have decent game script, if it wasn't Adrian Peterson, how old he is or whatever, I guess have all these biases against playing a guy like that. But I think it makes a certain amount of sense. It is in the later game, or it's in the earlier game, so you can't pivot like that. So I guess I like to give myself a little bit more flexibility in that range. Probably going to go to someone like Yeldon instead. Donald and Cash. Yeah, I'm not on Donald. I understand the play as far as opening up your roster. I just don't play guys with low team totals like that. I just want to see a little bit more for him. I get that there's a little bit of rushing equity, but paying all the way down at quarterback is something that I do like to do, but this is a slate where there's more than enough value to get up to the Mahomes Jimmy G range. Let's see. Yeah, appreciate all the questions, guys. This is awesome. Sanders versus Landry, talked about that a little bit. Ertz, yeah, I mean, Ertz is one of the biggest leverage plays on the slate, like I said, just because you're going to have a completely different roster than a lot of people. So definitely think that that's good. In tiers, I'm not sure who else is in his tier, but yeah, I would take a look at our projections on that one. Gurley over Kamara, yeah, I guess I haven't mentioned Kamara yet. Totally different roles in some ways, just because I think Gurley's going to see more action on the ground than Kamara, but Kamara is going to run so many routes. It's basically like rostering an elite wide receiver as far as his target share in a game that we expect to be high scoring if the Browns can keep up. Probably lean Gurley over Kamara this week, but it's going to be a very scary fade for someone that doesn't run a lot of lineups. Doyle and Kittle and flex, yeah, I talked about the two tight ends. If I was to do the two tight end strategy, it would definitely be Doyle and Kittle. Shady as a GPP pivot, yeah. So if there is a chance that Buffalo is going to play a little bit better in this game, I think Shady's going to be a big part of it. He's probably too cheap for his role. I actually was kind of on him a bit last week. Didn't make it there on one of my main teams, but I think that On FanDuel, he's 6,800, but on DraftKings at 5,700 for the role. Makes a decent amount of sense, but I don't normally play running backs that are massive dogs like this. But yeah, if you're kind of on the mindset that you think that Buffalo is going to play a little bit better this week, I think he'll be a big part of it. When you say you like someone like a noon one, do you mean cash, GPP, or both? Yeah, I'm primarily a tournament player, so if I say I like someone, I'm definitely considering them. Enunwa is one of those guys. I really like that price range, the Galladay, Enunwa, Cobb price range. So if I end up with two of those guys, Enunwa is definitely going to be someone that I'm considering. Duke Johnson attorneys. Yeah, his usage was actually a little bit disappointing last week. I thought that he was okay. Did like Carlos Hyde a decent amount. Just ended up playing all Connor in that price range last week. But Duke Johnson, I think he's fine if you're really trying to stack up that game. But I just think that Landry is probably a better option, or paying all the way down with Njoku and just hoping for a touchdown there. Donald too risky for cash. Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if people have been talking about it. I don't listen to a ton of content. I do majority of my own research. But yeah, I'm not really on Donald. Alfred Morris. Yeah, he's probably going to get 12 to 15 touches in that game. I'm a little bit concerned with pace in that game in general. Not really on that side of it. So yeah, that's my take on Morris. I probably won't have him, but I think he's fine. If you're playing like a ton of lineups. Rashard Higgins, viable option this week. Not really on Higgins. I think he's kind of a borderline kind of talent play that makes some sense, but I guess like more guys kind of in that range. Let's see who's in his range actually on DraftKings. So I don't just keep saying that. Higgins. Yeah, so at 3K, obviously he opens up a ton. If you can make it up to Cortland Sutton at 3,500, I think I like him considerably more than Higgins, just for the talent upside. If you're really trying to just lock in some targets, Bruce Ellington at 3,800, Mike Williams, someone mentioned 3,700, even Geronimo Allison. If it ends up not being Cobb, it could easily be one of these other guys for Green Bay that's not being covered by Rhodes. Thoughts on Kareem Hunt this week? Yeah, so I actually really like the idea of stacking the other side of that game, and Kareem Hunt would probably be a big part of that. I think there's going to be games this year that are extremely frustrating with him as far as his usage, but I do think that you'll get really low ownership because all these other guys are going to be really high owned, and anytime you get a part of this game that we expect to be extremely high scoring in a different kind of lineup construction, I think that's fine. Mentioned that I'm off tight end Jonnu with Gabbert, but can the argument be made that he need to focus more on shorter routes? Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Houston's going to be able to get pressure on Tennessee. I think that John is a really talented guy. If you really want to go there, if I'm on a really condensed player pool this week, and it's probably going to be Cook, Doyle, or Kittle in that range. But Jonnu and GPPs, it's the problem. He opens up a lot for sure. I just don't think that it's going to be a great game for scoring on that side of the ball. But it could obviously burn me with he's a talented guy in general. Pettis and Kittle in the same lineup in cash. Okay. Yeah, I think that there's a chance that the value options for San Francisco, they've kind of cooled off, at least in the community. But I still think they're really strong plays. I mentioned how much I like Garoppolo. Pettis saw a lot of volume last week. His price is still really solid. I think I do prefer Kittle. If you want to roll them both out in cash, I would assume that you are able to do a lot with your lineup. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at, guys. Let's take a quick peek at news. Devontae Parker inactive, Justin Hunter healthy scratch, Devontae Adams healthy. Yeah, so it looks like nothing that we didn't really kind of see coming. Looks like Rodgers is active, so definitely, like I said, think that Cobb is underrated in his price range for sure. So probably going to be back with another stream before the 3 o'clock games. I really like to kind of work through where my late swaps are going to be. Definitely think late swaps something that people don't take enough advantage of. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys coming. Hopefully we can do these morning hangouts. Really like doing this in general because it makes me not tinker with my lineups a ton. But going to continue to do this. Be sure and subscribe to the channel, guys. I'm just trying to grow the community a little bit and just kind of get a little bit more interaction with you guys. Really appreciate you guys being here for the first one. Maybe it'll be a little bit more smooth. It's the first one I've done, obviously. So, yeah, good luck in week 2, guys. I'm going to be hopefully back in a couple hours to kind of work through some pivots. So, yeah, subscribe, like, definitely check out Fantasy Labs. Again, no affiliate links, guys. I just think that that's where you should be doing your research if you want to be really serious about DFS. So, yeah, I'll see you guys in a couple hours. And, all right, good talk. See you guys out there.